For 16 long years, the world believed it understood the rise and the fall of Harold Ford Jr. They analyzed his speeches, scrutinized his decisions, and dissected every triumph and every failure as if they had lived them beside him. But in all that noise, one voice, the one that had witnessed the unfiltered truth, remained completely silent. Emily Threlkeld, the woman who stood in the shadows of his greatness, the woman who endured the whispers, the headlines, the accusations, the woman who paid the price for a life she never asked to live. While Harold climbed into the national spotlight, Emily carried the weight of the unseen battles, political storms, family expectations, and the scandal that nearly shattered everything they had built. For over a decade, she held her silence like armor while the world demanded answers she would not give. But now, after 16 years of emotional endurance, sacrifice, and quiet resilience, Emily is finally ready to speak, and what she reveals is not a defense, not an attack, but a truth far more intimate than anyone ever expected, one that exposes the hidden cost of loving a man whose entire existence unfolds under relentless public judgment. Before we hear her voice, we must understand the weight she carried, the legacy Harold was born into, the pressure that shaped him, and the storm that would one day test the limits of their marriage. Shall we continue? Long before the scandals, long before the political spotlight transformed his life, Harold Ford Jr. was born into a legacy that felt less like an inheritance and more like a destiny carved into his bones. He entered the world on May 11th, 1970, in Memphis, Tennessee, into a family name already woven tightly into the fabric of American politics. His father, Harold Ford Sr., wasn't just respected, he was historic. The first African American to represent Tennessee in Congress, a man who served for more than 2 decades, carrying both the hopes and the burdens of his community. His mother, Dorothy, embodied the same strength, quiet, steady, and dignified. The woman who ensured that the Ford name meant something deeper than power alone. For Harold, the oldest of 5 children, responsibility wasn't introduced to him. It was the air he breathed from the moment he opened his eyes. Politics wasn't a choice. It wasn't a dream. It was the inheritance he was expected to uphold, an unspoken promise that he would not only follow his father's path, but carry it further. His earliest lessons came not from textbooks, but from family gatherings at his grandfather N.J. Ford's funeral home, an unusual setting that doubled as a strategic hub for Memphis's Black political network. There, amid hushed conversations and community leaders moving in and out, like the changing of tides, Harold absorbed the mechanics of influence. He saw how loyalty was cultivated, how alliances were forged, and how quickly power could shift. And he also learned how easily it could crumble. As a teenager, he watched the painful unraveling of Operation Tennessee Waltz, a scandal in 2007 that engulfed his uncle, State Senator John Ford. It was a harsh reminder that the political landscape that elevated their family could just as easily scorch them. It was one more shadow Harold carried with him, a reminder that every victory demanded vigilance, and every misstep could become a generational wound. Despite the weight, Harold did what was expected. He excelled. At St. Albans School in Washington, D.C., he stood out, not because he tried to, but because he had been shaped for this world since birth. Later at the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied American history, professors looked at him not as a student, but as a future statesman. He has politics in his blood, one recalled. an observation that was both a compliment and a warning. Even as Harold embraced this path, a quiet struggle grew inside him. The pressure not just to succeed, but to redeem, restore, and protect the family name whenever it faltered. After earning his law degree from the University of Michigan in 1996, he stepped onto his own political stage, ready to prove that he was more than a son continuing a legacy. He wanted to rise on his own merits. But destiny has a way of complicating even the clearest path. The life he built, the one that lifted him into national prominence, would one day test his marriage, his identity, and the silent woman standing beside him. When Harold Ford Jr. stepped into the political arena in 1996, he wasn't simply launching a campaign. He was stepping into the role many believed he had been rehearsing his entire life. At just 26 years old, he captured the congressional seat his father had held for more than 2 decades. Overnight, he transformed from a promising young lawyer into one of the youngest members of Congress in modern American history. The victory electrified Tennessee. The press called him a once-in-a-generation talent. Pundits predicted he would one day reshape America's political landscape. To the outside world, Harold carried himself with confidence, an eloquent young moderate speaking about unity at a time when the nation was drifting toward division. If we're going to solve the big problems facing our country, he often said, we have to be willing to talk to one another. But behind those polished speeches was a truth only a few could see. Harold understood that every word, every smile, every decision was being measured not just against his own record, but against the legacy of the Ford family. And the higher he climbed, the further there was to fall. During his 10 years in Congress, he championed improvements in education, healthcare, and national security. Voters admired his ability to connect across party lines, an increasingly rare skill. But with influence came a scrutiny, and a scrutiny brought shadows. In the early 2000s, questions surfaced about unreported privately funded trips taken between 1998 and 2003. His office insisted the disclosures had been filed, but the controversy lingered. It wasn't career-ending, but it was a warning, a whisper of the dangers that had haunted his family before and would soon haunt him again. Then came 2006, the year that nearly changed everything. Harold launched a historic campaign for the U.S. Senate. Polls suggested he could become the first black senator from Tennessee since Reconstruction. The momentum was there. The excitement was real. For a moment, it seemed destiny was finally aligning in his favor. And then, a single political ad, dripping with racial undertones and aimed squarely at his personal life, flooded television screens. In seconds, months of progress were undone. The ad didn't just attack his platform, it attacked his very identity. Harold lost by 3 percentage points, a narrow margin, but emotionally it felt like a public collapse. And for Emily, who had only just begun to enter his world, this was her first encounter with the brutality of politics. A world where truth mattered less than perception and character could be dismantled in a 30-second broadcast. She stood beside him quietly, witnessing a man the country saw as unbreakable confront the weight of disappointment, legacy, and expectation. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of the storms she would endure. By the time Harold Ford Jr.'s Senate campaign ended in disappointment in 2006, fate had already placed someone extraordinary in his path, someone who would challenge him, soften him, steady him, and ultimately walked through some of the darkest years of his life with unwavering loyalty. Her name was Emily Threlkeld, and she was nothing like the political world Harold came from. Born in Naples, Florida, on January 2nd, 1981, Emily belonged to a universe defined not by campaign strategies or partisan battles, but by creativity, elegance, and precision. In New York, she worked behind the scenes in the fashion industry, assisting renowned designers like Carolina Herrera and Nina Ricci, a world filled with artistry, discipline, and its own unique brand of pressure. Their lives could not have been more different, yet somehow the contrast made their connection immediate and intense. Emily was known for her quiet composure, her intelligence, her instinctive ability to read a room without ever demanding attention. While others chased spotlights, Emily seemed to glow most brightly in the background, observing, understanding, anchoring. And those very qualities were exactly what Harold didn't know he needed. Her work in fashion was far more demanding than it appeared. Behind the glamorous facade were long hours, coordination of highest stakes events, reputation management, and constant scrutiny from elite clients. Without realizing it, Emily was training for the life she would soon lead beside Harold, a life where public perception could shift in seconds, and where grace under pressure was an essential survival skill. On April 26, 2008, they married in Miami. The guest list blended political powerhouses with icons of fashion, two worlds that rarely collided, now united under soft lights, warm vows, and a sense of hope that felt almost cinematic. But even then, Emily made one thing clear. She did not see herself as a public figure. She did not want fame. She wanted a family, a home, and a life where love mattered more than headlines. In the early years of their marriage, she built her own identity. She founded Basta Surf, a swimwear brand rooted in simplicity and empowerment. She participated in philanthropy, supporting the American Cancer Society and New York's cultural institutions. She refused to become merely the politician's wife. She insisted on being her own woman, independent, creative, and purpose-driven. Yet even as she built her world, she quietly became the emotional foundation of Harold's. From Congress to Merrill Lynch and eventually into television commentary, Harold's career demanded visibility, debate, and public validation. Every triumph came with a shadow, every misstep with a headline. And through it all, Emily remained the silent force that steadied their lives. Harold often praised her publicly, calling her my rock, the one who calmed every storm. But privately, Emily was beginning to understand the cost of loving a man whose life was never fully his own. She bore the pressure quietly. She absorbed the judgment silently. She carried burdens that weren't hers to carry. Yet nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare her for the scandal that would arrive years later. A scandal that would test their marriage, their identities, and her capacity for silence in a way she never imagined. In 2017, a single allegation, just one sentence whispered into the world, ignited a firestorm that threatened to consume everything Harold Ford Jr. and Emily had spent nearly a decade building. By then, Harold had reinvented himself. After leaving Congress, he stepped into the fiercely competitive world of Wall Street as a managing director at Morgan Stanley. And to many, he seemed to have mastered yet another arena with the same confidence and charisma that once propelled him through Washington. He was respected, influential, and seen as a man capable of thriving in any environment he entered. But the higher the climb, the colder the air becomes, and one allegation, was all it took to freeze the life they knew. In December 2017, media outlets claimed that Harold had been terminated over accusations of inappropriate behavior toward a female journalist. The timing was devastating. The nation was already engulfed in a wave of high-profile misconduct cases. Every headline became fuel. Every whisper became an echo chambers. And the media didn't wait. They rarely do. Within hours, Harold Ford Jr. was no longer the polished political thinker or respected financial executive. He was the embattled figure plastered across news tickers, a man fighting not just for his career, but for his name, his dignity, and his future. Harold denied it all unequivocally. "I have never forcibly grabbed any woman or man in my life," he stated. But the denial, no matter how firm, could not stop the tidal wave already forming. Morgan Stanley dismissed him. Journalists dug up old controversies. Commentators speculated endlessly. Friends whispered. Some defended him fiercely, others slipped quietly into the background, unwilling to risk the association. But the true devastation unfolded where cameras could not reach, inside the Ford home. Emily, who had always avoided the spotlight, suddenly found herself trapped at the center of a storm she never asked to enter. She had endured political defeat. She had accepted the relentless scrutiny of public life. But this was different. This was a direct strike at her family, at her marriage, at the life she had fought so hard to protect. And yet she never spoke, not once. No statements, no interviews, no explanations, not even a single attempt to defend herself or her husband. But silence does not mean acceptance. It does not mean ignorance. And it certainly does not mean weakness. According to close friends, Emily stood by Harold with a loyalty rooted not in denial, but in conviction. She believed in him. She believed the accusations were false, and she chose to hold her ground quietly, even as the world demanded her reaction. But loyalty comes with a price. One paid in sleepless nights, in private tears, in whispered fears for their children, and in the suffocating knowledge that a single allegation could stain their family's future forever. Eventually, the frenzy faded, as all media storms do. The world moved on, but a scar remained, a painful reminder that a reputation built over decades could be threatened in a single day. And Emily, she carried the heaviest part of that scar silently, so the rest of the family wouldn't have to. For more than 16 years, people asked the same quiet question. Why doesn't Emily Threlkeld ever speak? She stood beside her husband through political battles, career changes, and the scandal that nearly destroyed them. She attended events with grace, returned home without drama, and never once stepped forward to give the world her version of the truth. No interviews, no statements, no emotional confessions. Her silence became a mystery, one the public tried to fill with assumptions. Some believed she was protecting Harold. Others assumed she was hiding pain. A few imagined she simply didn't care. But now, after 16 long years, Emily has finally chosen to speak out, not with a public announcement, not with a press conference, but through a series of deeply private, deeply honest conversations with close friends. What she revealed was far more intimate than any headline could capture. She did not talk about politics. She did not relive the accusations. She did not attempt to rewrite the past. Instead, Emily spoke about something far more human, the emotional cost of loving a man whose life belonged to the public. She described the crushing weight, of watching the world dissect your husband's every action, every smile, every perceived flaw, while you yourself become a silent figure standing in the background, expected to be strong simply because you never break. She admitted quietly and without bitterness that the hardest part was not the scandal itself, but the silence she was expected to maintain. Silence to protect her husband. Silence to shield her children. Silence even to protect the people who judged her without ever knowing her. There were nights, she confessed, when she wondered whether the life she had chosen, the life of a political wife, a public figure's partner, was too heavy, too unforgiving, too demanding of her gentleness. But there were lessons too. Lessons about loyalty, lessons about resilience, lessons about forgiveness. Not the cinematic kind, but the quiet kind that grows slowly, painfully over years. Sheila spoke of Harold not as the polished politician or seasoned commentator the public sees, but as a man humbled by failure and reshaped by experience. Everyone sees the headlines, she told one friend softly, but they don't see the human being you come home to at the end of the day. Her truth wasn't vengeful, it wasn't dramatic, it was real, the kind of honesty born only from years of endurance. For the first time, Emily allowed others to see the woman she truly is, not a shadow, not a symbol, not the silent figure beside a famous man, but a woman who endured storms few people could ever imagine, and who somehow managed to remain whole. Their marriage had faced victory, defeat, scandal, reinvention, and in the end, the voice that mattered most, the one the world waited 16 years to hear, was not loud, not angry, not accusatory. It was vulnerable. It was human. It was hers. When the scandal smoke finally began to clear, Harold Ford Jr. found himself standing at a crossroads, one that could have ended his public life forever. Many expected him to retreat, to fade away quietly into a life of private work and forgotten influence. But Harold was not built that way. He had grown up inside storms. He had rebuilt himself before, and now he would do it again. In 2018, he made a move that surprised nearly everyone. He joined Fox News as a political contributor. To the outside world, it seemed almost contradictory. A lifelong Democrat was stepping into one of the most influential conservative networks in America. But for Harold, it wasn't about ideology. It was about reclaiming his voice, carving out a space to speak for himself again, without being filtered through a scandal or speculation. He understood politics. He understood media. He understood the power of narrative. What he needed was a platform where he could begin rewriting his own. At Fox News, Harold found something he hadn't felt in years: stability. His commentary was sharp, knowledgeable, and rooted in years of experience inside Washington's corridors of power. Viewers expecting partisan heat were often surprised, sometimes even disarmed, by his calm insistence on civil discourse. "We need more conversation and less division," he repeated often, like a quiet plea to a country tearing itself apart. Slowly, public perception began to shift, not dramatically, not overnight, but enough. Enough for people to remember his intellect rather than the accusations. Enough for audiences to reconsider him as a thinker, not a headline. And through it all, Emily remained exactly what she had always been: the invisible backbone holding their world together. While Harold debated national issues under the studio lights, she protected the sanctuary of their home. She created routines for their two children, grounding them in warmth and the stability. She pursued her philanthropic commitments, supporting the American Cancer Society and New York's cultural institutions. She kept her dignity intact, not by hiding, but by refusing to let chaos define her identity. To friends who knew them well, one thing became undeniable. Emily's emotional resilience was central to Harold's ability to move forward. He was the public figure, but she was the quiet force that steadied the ground beneath him. Yet the scars of 2017 never truly vanished. Every interview carried the memory of those headlines. Every public appearance echoed with a quiet fear. What if another accusation arose? What if the past returned? What if the world judged him again and judged her with him? For Emily, silence evolved into something more profound. It became endurance, a shield forged from pain, loyalty, and unspoken sacrifice. She had survived political defeat, media scrutiny, corporate dismissal, and the cruel spotlight of public doubt. And after each blow, she never stepped away. She rebuilt herself quietly, and in doing so, she helped Harold rebuild himself too. But the world still didn't know her story. Not until now, after 16 years of carrying burdens she never asked for, Emily was finally ready to reveal the truth behind her silence, a truth far more human, far more intimate, and far more powerful than the world ever expected.